You think this was tinkering and irrelevant as well, then, what the Prime Minister was up to in Brussels?
Look, everybody knows what the Prime Minister was doing was trying to manage the deep division there is in the Conservative Party over Britain's place in Europe. He never wanted this referendum originally. He didn't want the renegotiation. And he's ended up where we always knew he would, which is campaigning for Britain to stay in the EU because it's the right thing to do for the British people because of the jobs investment.
But, I mean, you think...
security and influence it gives us.
But you just think on the issue itself, you just shouldn't have asked for anything at all because it was going along pretty well anyway. Is that...
No, we're not saying that because we're in favour of reform, and indeed some of the things that he has achieved were things that we put in our election manifesto. For example, we said that we should have a red card. We've now got
So
that.
It wasn't irrelevant then?
It was irrelevant in this sense, Dermot. It didn't change Labour's view of whether the right thing to do is to stay in the European Union or to leave. Now, the Prime Minister pretended, well, it all depends on this negotiation, but everyone knows he set out wanting to stay in. He had to go through this process. He's ended up saying, I want to stay in. So it's irrelevant in that sense, but protecting the pound, because we're not in the euro. The last Labour government rightly said we're not going to join the euro. Not being in the... other decisions that have been taken...
Came to that view eventually.
Well, no, not eventually. We took the right decision. And boy, was it the right decision, because
eventually.
It would have been a terrible mistake for Britain to have joined the euro.
OK, well, we don't want to revisit that whole campaign. But, you know, why isn't Jeremy Corbyn foursquare behind all this? We know he's lukewarm about Europe, don't we?
No, he is foursquare behind Britain remaining in the European Union. I mean, look at the article he's written today. Because he's clear, I'm clear, the Labour Party is clear. What's this about? It's about jobs. Let's take a really practical example, Dermot. Every day we export nearly 2,000 cars to the European Union, and they go there without having to pay any tariff at all. Now, cars that come to Europe from Japan and America have to pay a 10% tariff. That is one of the reasons why so many companies have invested in the car industry in Britain, because we have tariff-free access to the biggest single market in the world. And what does that mean for British people? It means well-paid jobs in highly skilled manufacturing for people up and down the country who are producing those cars.
Well,
now, there's a very practical example of the benefits of being in the European Union and why we're better.
But it's just the leader of Her Majesty's opposition. You remember last week, it seems ancient history though now, don't you? That letter that you came out with, you were one of the signatories along with Lord Kinnock, Jack Straw, Margaret Beckett, Lord Blunkett. No, Jeremy Corbyn, he didn't sign that letter. And these were... apart from yourself, these have been Eurosceptic people in the past. We know Jeremy Corbyn was one of them 41 years ago in 1975. Why didn't he sign that letter? Did you ask him?
Because we were a group of former ministers. All of us were former ministers and one former commissioner. That was what, if you like, self-identified the group.
So Jeremy Corbyn wanted to sign it, but you wouldn't let him?
No. This was an initiative that a group of former ministers who had campaigned in 75 against remaining in what was then the common market, explaining why we had changed our mind. The fact is there is no difference between
Jeremy Corbyn had campaigned in 1975 against staying in the common market. Surely you could have overlooked the nuance that perhaps he hadn't had a ministerial role or a shadow ministerial role. He is now leader of the Labour Party. Did you ask him to sign that letter?
He wasn't asked to sign that letter because it was a letter put together by a group of former ministers. But you're really having, if I may say so, Dermot,
well, it's just
to scrape the bottom of the barrel to try and find division that doesn't exist within the Labour Party, because we are absolutely clear. You know, we went through a process changing our mind. I've changed my mind compared with 75. The fact is, it's good for the British people to be in Europe. A lot of jobs depend on it. It makes us more secure. You know, in the last decade or so, about 5,000 people who are criminal suspects have been removed from this country to face justice in other countries because we have the European arrest warrant. One of the failed 21st of July 2005 bombers who fled to Italy was brought back to face justice and was convicted of that attempt to blow up Londoners for the second time in 2 weeks. Why? Because of the European arrest warrant. And that is why we are going to be safer in the European Union as well as better off. And as the Shadow Foreign Secretary, I would say to you that actually being in Europe strengthens Britain's voice in the world and our influence, because if we're going to deal with the problems that you and I have discussed on a number of occasions that affect the world of which we are part.
But you have got this issue, haven't you?
It's going to be much easier to do it if we work with our neighbours.
I mean, there is, as you've identified, as you have accepted, there is a streak, at least, of Euroscepticism within your party. I mean, we look at this survey done quite recently that of the 142 seats that are most likely to vote to leave, 63% of them are held by Labour MPs. I mean, you've got an uphill struggle, haven't you, to convince the people who voted for Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh, I don't think we have an uphill struggle at all amongst Labour Party members, because the Labour Party's policy, the Labour Party Conference's policy, has for a very long time been reaffirmed yet again last September, is that we want to remain in the European Union for all the reasons.
So you wouldn't accept that out there in the constituencies amongst grassroots Labour supporters, many of them have doubts about the European Union. You don't accept that?
I accept that not everything about the European Union is perfect. We want to see reform. But the decision that we're going to take on the 23rd of June is the most important one we will have faced, as you know, as a country for over 40 years. And it's very simply this: are we going to be better off in, and I believe passionately, and Labour's view is that we will, and you've got, what, 213 Labour MPs who signed up to support it, the overwhelming majority of Labour MPs, the overwhelming majority of Labour Party members, but this is a referendum. You've got to vote, I've got to vote,
and
we're going to have to persuade people that that is the right thing to do.
Well, let me ask you about the campaign, and I mean, are Labour Party members going to keep any Conservatives a long distance away from them? Because you're mentally scarred, aren't you? And the lasting scars are there from the campaign against Scottish independence there, when your party has been painted in Scotland as basically red Tories. You don't want to share any platforms, do you, with Conservatives?
Well, I said right at the beginning that I'm not going to be sharing any platforms with any Conservatives during this referendum campaign. That's why we've set up our Labour campaign, headed by Alan Johnson, because, as your previous question rightly identified, we want to talk to Labour supporters and persuade them that this is the right thing to do in the interests of the country and themselves, their families, their jobs, the incomes that depend on being part of this single market. And the Tories have got a big problem because the cabinet is split. The parliamentary Tory party is split, and that's why David Cameron went down this road, because he couldn't handle his own party, and he put his party interest above the national interest. Well, this referendum is now about the national interest.
What about you putting the national interest above the party interest? You're quite satisfied, aren't you, to see that fight within the Conservatives take place, and you're just standing on the sidelines?
Well, look, in the end, I want Britain to remain in the European Union, because that's bigger than any party debate or fight, because it is about the future of our country, our place in the world.
Say it comes down to a few days before the vote, the polls come out, they're neck and neck, and you get a call from the Prime Minister's office saying, well, look, Mr Benn, you've been one of the most enthusiastic on the Labour side. I think it would really help if we showed a united front to the nation, cross-party united front, saying, vote for us to stay in. You wouldn't do it.
I will be saying that we should vote to stay in, but I'm not proposing to share any platforms with the Prime Minister. Look, we work our separate sides of the street in the course of the campaign, but I want everyone who supports Britain remaining in the European Union in the national interest.
I'm just saying how strong that line is, that line in the sand. You will not cross that in the national interest.
I'm not going to share any platforms with Conservatives, because we've got our own Labour campaign, and the Conservatives have got their own campaign. But in the end, everybody who thinks it is in the national interest for Britain to remain in should do everything they can in their own way to encourage people to take that decision when polling day comes.
And just lastly, your thoughts on, this is the other party, of course, your thoughts on the Mayor of London dithering over his decision?
Well, I'm surprised, really, because Boris Johnson in the past has written a lot about the importance of staying in the European Union, and if he is actually thinking about putting his personal leadership ambitions above the national interest, I don't think it's going to do him any good.
Hilary, Benn, very good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. The Shadow Foreign Secretary there.